Okay. So we are here again today, Vignesh and Luca. We live in Asheville and we are here to present more of how we orient around this election and what lives as a heart plea in me as someone who cannot vote in this election, as someone who lives in an important swing state of North Carolina. So it lives like a heart plea in me of like, oh, please vote for Trump. Because I wrote this essay today on freedom and what it means to feel free. And it was not like a heady intellectual essay. It was more of like just like a sharing of what it feels like to be free of all of these different constructs and abstractions that I used to carry before and feel like burdened by, that I've shed over the years and got into this place of like, oh yeah, wow, I feel so free to choose who I want to spend time with, how I want to show up, what I want to spend my energy doing. And it's so beautiful. Like there's nothing like it. Like there's nothing like freedom, and I truly want that for like everyone. Like I truly deeply want that for everyone that I cross paths with. And yeah, it's been quite a journey for me to acknowledge that with all of the different personal dislikes that I carried towards Trump, the person, the values that he's bringing forth for our society as a whole, are values that I like deeply align with and that I feel like will enable more freedom to spread across the American society and thereby across the world. And I clipped today something from our second video where you spoke about what progressivism is, and I thought it was so rich. Like I still remember hearing you speak to that and being like so alive hearing you speak to it, because it is very paradoxical. It's like very, very paradoxical. Like progressivism is very paradoxical. And it's captured in that one line you said, where you said that progressivism is not a majoristic thing. Like progressivism, when new ways of being are emerging, they are in the minority. They never emerge from like some authority. None would say like often emerge from like the grassroots up. And I'm reminded of like the French Revolution in this moment, where the concept of nationalism emerged in human society because of the French Revolution. And there's a beautiful video about how it emerged, like how nationalism emerged. But the essence of it is that prior to nationalism coming through, we did not have this notion of all humans in a nation equal under law. Like that principle was not present, because the monarchs and the feudal lords and the rest of society, there were like three classes of society almost. And the church was somewhere in there, and there were different laws for each one. And these French philosopher revolutionaries, Robespierre is one name coming to my mind, I forget who the others were, but they just like created the concept of the French nation, of all French people, and declared that everyone is the same under law, even though the power at that time was in hands of the monarch. Like, it is so wild for like a small group of humans to come together and just declare, actually, no, everyone is going to be equal under law. And then they brought that vision forth, and it was a bloody bringing forth of it. Like, they like just chopped off the heads of whoever disagreed with that. But it literally was that they like removed the heads of the body of people. Like, everyone became a part of the body that the nation was, and no one was a head above. So metaphorically, in that like guillotining of all the French upper class, basically, like they just brought this vision forth. And so it's like, and there is, we are not at equilibrium in any ways. Like, we haven't reached a state of being where people are thriving, free of suffering, like following their heart's passion. Like, we haven't reached there. So it is still important to like really cultivate individual freedom, individual like entrepreneurial creativity, so that the next philosopher revolutionaries may emerge and bring forth ways of living that are then adopted by the majority.
Yeah. Beautiful, man. Yeah. Yeah, it really resonated, and that feels very alive. Yeah, that reminds me of quite a few years ago now. I was talking with a friend, and it was a huge transformative moment. I was like, he was more focused on what we called like advancing the pinnacle, which is like the people who are living the best lives, helping them live better lives. And I was like, but shouldn't we be focusing on, helping the people who are living like bad lives, and who are, helping people in suffering, like reach the same level of good life that, the people who are living a privileged life can live, which I think is a lot of the mindset of at least on the left, is a strong mindset. And I was totally in that at the time, and I was like disagreeing with my friend. And then he was like, well, I think everyone is living a fairly shitty life, including the people who are at the pinnacle. Like, it's still so far below human potential, and still has so much suffering. And so I think it's more important for us to focus on like raising that pinnacle, and then like we don't even have the vision yet of the perfect life, not perfect, but the like a flourishing life that then we can pull other people into. We're just pulling people from a very shitty to a slightly less shitty situation if we do that. And that it took me several months, but I was still very resistant after that to like that mindset. But then I started coming around to it a bit more. And similar to what you're saying about like freedom, and also I love what you said about like not being in equilibrium yet. That feels very true. Where we don't yet have the thing to pull people that are suffering more than us into. Like we do in a very superficial way, like material abundance. But that's, that's the difference between someone, I mean, above like really terrible, like not being able to feed yourself, not having shelter levels. But if you're like a little bit above that, the difference between that level of material well-being and being like a billionaire, in terms of like your spiritual and emotional well-being, the difference is not that great,
right?
Especially relative to like your sense of belonging, like your community structures, the extent to which you're connected to yourself, you work through your shame, all these other elements that are so much more important, the extent to which you have transcended or broken through the selfhood isolation delusion and are more like, enmeshed in the universe. And all these things are like vastly more important or more effective or have more effect on your well-being than just the material level. Yeah, so that feels like a really big alive thing. And like just this weekend I was at a thing called Love Song, which is such a beautiful gathering, where it's like 100, 150 people coming together and we're singing all these beautiful songs and dancing. But doing it in a very like deeply communal context. And there's a lot of like people supporting each other, going through hard things. And it's so radical relative to like normal life in Western society. And it's also so natural to human flourishing. Like when you're in that, like my heart was really getting so opened. And the sense of community and belonging is just like, it was like intrinsic in the air. And so, yeah, relating to what you're saying about freedom, like in terms of progressivism, is we're still quite early on in that journey, like in the full scheme of things. And when you feel that vision fully, so not like, oh, we're gonna deal with racism and then it's gonna be like great, you know, it's like the scale is so much larger in terms of like well-being possibilities, and the people who are privileged, you know, in quotes, the privileged people, are not yet anywhere close to like really deep, full human flourishing. And in the long term, like having the orientation on that long-term vision of like, wow, the profound possibilities for human flourishing, that there's still a long path towards. And at the same time, we can also feel that in the moment in many ways already. So it's not all like this doom and gloom narrative. And actually part of that revolution is like finding the joys of being alive, even in the current context. But the vision there is just this strong feeling, no matter who you are, if you really tap into like the deep, you know, like your belly intuition and like the depths of your heart, like wow, we're really not, even the people who are living the best lives, in quotes, in Western society are still massively far away from like this full, deep, beautiful collective flourishing. And that's not something we're like on a clear, concrete, step-by-step path yet to get to. Which goes back to the first video where like the left takes a certain path, a very narrow path of like, these are the progressive causes.
I'll pause you there for a second.
Yeah.
Before we go down that, like the question that kept coming alive in me is like, I think so far we have shared this, like the notion to kind of just summarize is that, yeah, we are not there yet and we still need more space for creative experimentation, exploration.
Yeah.
Then instead of going down what the wrong things the left is doing and the Democrats are doing, the question that was kept coming alive in me was like, why Trump? You know, it's like, why? Okay, we've shared this idea of wanting to create space for more experimentation, for better ways of being to emerge.
Yeah.
Yeah, why Trump? Why would voting for Trump create that?
Yeah. There's a lot of different angles to that. I think one that we've touched on before, like I'm kind of wondering whether to go into policy or not. I'm feeling like maybe not quite yet in this moment, but maybe in the next moment after this first thing that I want to say, which is something we've talked about as well, which is that Trump is like the human being fighting the machine. And he doesn't look, like I feel like there's this utopian vision that people can have, and that I used to have as well. Like even what I was just saying with this vision of the long term, then there's this, in my opinion, a dangerous failure mode of that is like, okay, I have a specific vision of what that looks like. You know, like people are going to be living in this kind of way, and like even like the visual image of what that might look like, and this is what our leaders would be like, etc. And I think that distracts from like the true mission of in this moment, from where we are working towards that vision, which is opportunistic in the sense that this is the landscape we have, and these are the possibilities in our own personal lives and also in the grander landscape. This is what we have, and then opportunistically, how can we relate to that in a way that feels like it's gonna move us towards that vision, and having ideally integration between that vision and the current moment, you know, but not having this like rigidity of like, this is what it has to look like and it has to be this vision, and my goal is just to like rigidly force this vision to happen, in contrast to all the signals I'm getting that it's maybe not working, or that there's like pushback that's maybe too much for this to even work. And I think that's dangerous, and that's where you get the utopia turning into dystopia, because there's this like forcing happening. And so the opportunistic frame feels to me like much more alive in terms of like true progressivism that's attuned to the fact that we're still very far from that, and we don't know what the path is there exactly. Like there's almost like a flying too close to the sun arrogance in that, of like the world's just so complex, and we for sure have this feeling in us of what it is, but we don't yet have the like clarity on the vision. So that's the first thing, is like opportunistically relating, and then Trump comes along and like he doesn't look at all like a Robin Hood savior character, and in many ways feels like the opposite of what you would want this like compassionate, conscious leader to be
He's
in
not
this
like
new
a
world.
knight in shining armor.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
Like he's not,
And he's not like Gandhi or something, you know,
Right.
like, or Nelson Mandela, you know, all these figures that we have of like what a compassionate leader would be like. So then if you're in this like rigid frame of like, this is the future and it has to look like this, then it's like, oh no, Trump is like the opposite of that.
I'm just gonna message. It's so weird that my mom called.
It's still recording.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Trump is like the opposite of that relative to this ideal vision. But from the opportunistic frame, like, to me, it's the energetic direction that he's going. He himself is opportunistic, I would say, where he's gone through whatever process he's gone through. And this is kind of a longer story of like what he's like as a human being. But he's gone through whatever process he's gone through, where he was like, he saw what was in his opinion the direction that was needed for this long-term space opening, and I think he is also ultimately like sees that, and a lot of his vision with Make America Great Again is to return to the young energy of America, and this like our best days are ahead of us because we don't yet know what it's going to be, and that's the whole point of America, is this like experiment. Maybe experiment's the wrong word, this like exploration and growth into the possibilities of fully flourishing humanity. And he saw that space closing and he was like, well damn, like it seems like I'm the only one that's willing and able. And this was over a 20-year period. The first time that he started talking about, at least that I've seen an interview of him, that he's already talking about the issues he's talking about now. He's like 30 something or something. He's like super young. And then he even gets asked like, would you run for president? And he's like, no, like that sounds terrible. I've got a great life, but like, you know, maybe if I have to, I might do it, but you know, I'm not planning on it. So, and then that like 20, 30 years later is when he actually, if not more, 40 maybe, he actually decides to run. And I think a lot of the process that he went through there is just realizing like, I'm going to bring in a Lord of the Rings reference.
Sure, yeah.
You know, like where, I forget if it's Gandalf or Frodo, but it's like, we can't choose the time we live in or a role, something like that, but we can choose like whether we accept the mantle of whatever our age is and whatever it asks of us.
Right.
That's butchering the exact quote, but so I think Trump had that same moment where he was like, damn, like I am the person that's gonna bring back that open space that's gonna enable this really long-term arc of America towards deeper flourishing. Yeah, and so he's relating to it opportunistically, and I'm relating to him opportunistically, which is, again, I think is the core of progressivism, is like relating to the moment, the current moment opportunistically, even as you have this long-term vision that you're like firm in and strong values of what that's like, and like a radicality in your perspective. But partially because of the radicality of that, you can't have everything be perfect in your current, in the current moment of that trajectory. It necessarily has to be opportunistic.
Yeah, it's like the way I'm hearing opportunistic is like, keeping the long-term vision in mind, but not getting hung up on what steps you need to take to get there, and like finding what is like the next small step that you can take that keeps you aligned with that vision. Versus taking you further away from it. Like that's how I'm hearing it.
Exactly.
And there is a part of me that goes, you know, has some like negative connotation with the word opportunism. It has this like use and throw connotation of like, oh, I'm just gonna use whatever comes my way and then move on to the next thing. You know, I'm curious how you relate to that aspect of opportunism, or specifically with regards to, I think both of us have said that, or at least I tell people that, I think Trump is the best choice for 2024, but I don't feel 2028 there might be some other choice that might be better. Like I don't feel like a always Trumper or something. It's like Trump till I die or something. Like I don't feel that way. And
Same, yeah.
And it feels healthy in a way to just look at, okay, we have an election coming up. These are the two options. Who's the better choice? Go with that, without trying to entangle my identity with him. It kind of all allows me to accept his flaws in some ways. So cool. So you're back again. We were talking about the negative perceptions of opportunism and choosing Trump in this election without necessarily getting entangled from an identity perspective with him. Curious to hear.
I love that you brought that up. Both of those things, the negative connotations of opportunism and then not getting entangled with Trump. On the opportunism, I feel like it's really important to reclaim that word in a sense, for pretty deep reasons actually. Because opportunism is taking opportunities, and in contrast to what I was saying earlier of like forcing things to happen, and that feels really essential to me in terms of how to relate to progressivism. And the negative connotation of opportunism, I think, is related to the fact that a lot of what presents itself as progressivism is anti-progressivism because it shuts out opportunism and gets into this utopia to dystopia dynamic where you're forcing the utopian vision such that you close yourself to opportunities because they don't match exactly the opportunity, right? So you're just in this you're not even feeling the opportunities because you're have a set vision that's in this opportunistic frame. Versus the opportunistic vision is where you kind of go like this, and to me it comes from being more firmly in your values because you're firmly enough in your values that you don't need to be attached to a specific vision, and you can open yourself to things that, like, if you're not firmly enough in your values, they don't look like it, but if you go deep enough, deep enough layers. And for me, that's when I relate to Trump. It's that, like, he doesn't look like the vision, And I've talked to a few people actually about this who are really deep in compassionate consciousness and NVC, and they were also supporting Trump, and I was like mind blown. I was, at first I was mind blown, and then it made sense. And I think it's the same where, like, they're so deeply in nonviolent communication that they are able to have this opportunistic mindset towards, Trump is the best thing in the long term for a world in which we're all living in compassionate consciousness, right? Which sounds crazy to say because we were both acknowledging in this conversation, he is in many ways the opposite of that, like on a very deep level, because he's not in compassionate consciousness, towards a lot of different people, and towards a lot of different groups. And on a deeper level, maybe he is, like, in some ways, but, like, for sure in terms of just when you see him as a person, you're like, okay, he's not the paragon of compassionate consciousness. But in this opportunistic frame, you're so deep in those values that you can relate to this opportunity as, given the context of the world we live in and the landscape, and that we're very far from this compassionate consciousness, this is actually the right way of doing it. So I think it's like you got to a really deep thing with the negative connotation of opportunism is actually a major barrier, in my opinion, towards the depth of progressivism in the long term.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, as I'm taking that in, actually, as you were showing that kind of more embodied view of what opportunism looks like, it reminded me of what I see as being conscious in terms of having optionality. Like, when I am in a trauma-triggered place, it creates this fallacy in front of me that I don't have a choice, because that was my experience in the trauma, that I did not have choice. Right. And for me, like, being conscious and aware means, like, I have so many options. Like, the world is what is the phrase? The world is an oyster. The world is my oyster.
Yeah.
Is that
the world is my oyster?
The world is my oyster. And there's just, like, so many opportunities of how I want to live life, and there are many ways to flourish. It's like it creates that orientation, and it reminds me a lot of, like, J. Krishnamurti's writings about how, like, he talks about freedom as, like, instantaneous alertness and awareness of all the options that are always there in front of you. And yeah, and still like bringing us back to, and the other thing that came up for me was there is this beautiful, I think Tibetan Buddhist sutta or something that talks about what one should try to, what judgments one should set aside while listening to a teacher. And two of those judgments are, I don't like how he looks, how the teacher looks, like physical appearance, and I don't think the teacher has a good lineage. So you kind of set those aside while you listen.
Whoa.
Only then can you truly hear and there's 3 more such. And it's really, ever since I read this, and I'll try to add a source to this somewhere in the video description, I think it applies to everyone. Like anytime I'm listening to someone, if I have these judgments towards them, like I don't like how he looks and I don't think he's of good lineage, which, the broader sense of that for me is, past history is bad or something. Like bad has done shoddy things in the past. Like if I am crowded by those, I just am unable to listen to what the human is trying to say to me.
Yeah.
It just won't reach me. Like that's what the Tibetan Buddhist sutta says. Like you just won't be able to take in anything if you have these judgments, because they create a block. And to what you were talking about, these like people who are practicing compassionate communication and compassionate consciousness and rooted in their values, once I'm rooted in my values, I'm like, oh yeah, bring on all the perspectives. Yeah, please. It's like, I would love to hear your perspective, because I'm like never afraid of something coming in and like pushing me off my values and then getting all like chaotic and like frenetic and I don't know what to do. I don't, it's like because my rooting feels so firm, or when my rooting feels firm, I'm like, yeah, bring on perspectives, and I can be like, oh, interesting, that's your perspective, and interesting to hear, and I'm curious, how did you end up in that perspective? How did I end up in this perspective? Like that curiosity stays alive.
Yeah.
Instead of needing to call you a racist and I've had that instinct too. Like I have had many instincts of calling liberal Americans names, and that's a fair human instinct to have. But beyond that, there is an openness of like, oh, why are you in this perspective, and how does that show up in your life? Like how free are you in your life? What is the optionality you see? What is the opportunism you see? Where are you turning away from things that are hard? How depressed are you in your life? Like all of those curiosities come up in me.
Yeah, man, I love all that. A lot of thoughts came up for me, really exciting ones.
Yeah.
So the first one on the lineage thing, I love that you brought that up as one of the things to not relate to in the teacher, because I've had some conversations with people where that comes up, like the Trump lineage of like capitalism, like white male patriarchy, dominator culture, which kind of is his lineage, like that's kind of undeniable in some sense. But yeah, when you project that lineage onto him, you lose touch with the fact that he came out of that lineage, but then he like almost like did this weird like pop out kind of thing. And for sure his behavior, a lot of that still carries through in his how he shows up in the world. But something about him has popped out of that. And I think that's something you can only feel when you, first of all, you have to watch him speak at length. Like little clips, or just, because they always take the sound bites that are not representative of like his overall persona, and also watch him speak in various different contexts, because he has like 20 different personas that come out, and depending on his audience. In my opinion, in natural, I don't think he's necessarily like forcing it cognitively. I think his instinct is doing that. regardless of watching him speak, and then also not being attached to the lineage part of, because he's in this lineage, anything he says is going to be representative of that lineage. And then you can just project anything into what he's saying as being part of that lineage, especially because how he talks is of that lineage. So when you take a step back from projecting that lineage onto him, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier with, like, he doesn't look like the Nelson Mandela or the Gandhi figure. He looks like he's of the lineage that those figures are against, and he in many ways behaves that way. So stepping back from that and almost like sucking those projections into you and then just relating to him in this pure sense, like as you're saying, like as a human being, and then you can start receiving his message and maybe agree and maybe disagree, but at least then the message itself is the Trump message is coming through versus the, like, his lineage of like white male patriarchal dominator culture, capitalism lineage, that whatever associations you have with that, instead of that coming through, it's like the pure Trump lineage coming through, or not lineage, the pure Trump message coming through. And then there's this thing where, like, it feels really weird to say, like, you know, this really rich billionaire that's spent a lot of time among the elites is the one to break open that system and be the kind of the guerrilla warrior rebel to break that. It just feels weird. You know, you expect it to be like a Robin Hood, Gandhi figure. But that's kind of what it is in a way, or at least to me that's what it feels like. And so I love that lineage comment.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing there is, you know, pertaining to the opportunism, is that if someone wants, if you're a progressive human who wants someone to break us out of this elite system, oppressive culture that we are in, and those are not the best chosen labels. Are you even open to the possibility that it could be someone from that set of elites, or are you thinking it necessarily has to be someone who is not from that elite? You know, it's like, are you hung up on, oh, the person who is going to take us forward away from the negatives of white patriarchal dominator culture? Are you open to the possibility that that person could be a white male? You know, it's like that's the question mark. Like,
a rich male from that system too.
Are you open to that? And it almost, it kind of brings me back to the other aspect of, you know, why opportunism feels so negative. And I wish I could get this focus back on. Okay, there we go. Is that because there is this underlying subconscious assumption that if I act in my self-interest, I'm going to abuse others. Like, that is like an underlying assumption that I have. So when I think of being opportunistic, I'm acting in my self-interest, and it's tied because we have a history of like abuse stemming from people acting from self-interest. There is this like assumption that, oh, if I act in my self-interest, I'm going to damage others and it's going to be at the expense of others. Like, that's part of where my negative connotation of opportunism comes from. And in some ways that doesn't have to be the case. Like, that's the value of capitalism that I feel connected to, which is that it is a pie that grows, and like my operating in my self-interest doesn't have to come at at your expense, or at the expense of some woman, or the expense of some child. And that actually all humans, when they operate from a place of self-interest while they're connected to their hearts, create like something beautiful, something magical for all of us. Like, that's a value that I'm noticing, that I'm speaking from.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the key, is the connecting people to their hearts and to this, like, the intrinsic desire to contribute. And to me, that feels like the big thing to work on. And that's not, in my opinion, a thing that can come top down from government. That's more a grassroots thing of like this, you could call it like the spiritual awakening, spiritual renaissance, or you can give it softer terms, like helping people heal and connect to their hearts. Whatever words you want to put onto it, but that feels like the key thing that is like the big, how would I call it, like barrier or something, or the big breakthrough that we're working towards. And from there you'll get the emergence. And right now what's important is the space for that grassroots like spiritual awakening process to happen. And a lot of that is about having the space for those things to merge. And then there was another thing you said that I really wanted to. I had such a great thought about it. Okay, maybe we'll have to edit this part out because I have to remember what it was.
Yeah, sit with it for a bit.
Yeah, it was about, you were talking about lineage. Something related to the like Trump is the ayahuasca trip stuff, but it wasn't quite that. Yes, okay, I remembered it. Okay, and there was another thing you said, I don't remember exactly what it was, but the thought that I had come up is just during lunch today, we have a little container with some friends where we talk about challenges we're facing. And something that came up is like perfection is shame, which is Dr. Brene Brown wrote a book, and one of the central themes, which was something about something imperfection, beautiful imperfection, something like that. And one of the key tenets there is that perfection is shame in disguise, where you want to hide your shame and you don't want to bring it into relation.
I see.
And so you close yourself into this like perfection bubble. And
you agree with that, or how do you?
I think there's definitely a deep truth to that. Yeah, I don't know if I would necessarily agree with it in that framing.
Sure.
There's also a form of perfectionism that is, I think, not necessarily coming from that.
Yeah.
But in relation to Trump is this like, and this is a journey I've actually personally gone through, which is in order for me to be on my spiritual path of contribution to the world, like the shame that is inside of me requires me to be perfect to be on that path in the first place. So there's like, you have to be perfectly healed before you can do anything, anything profound at least. And if you're not fully healed, you can't step fully into your full spiritual divine self and whatever that means in terms of like your flow through the world and how you're contributing to the people around you. But like relating to Trump and realizing he's so imperfect and he's on his path. Like maybe he's on his path, and like
I mean, he's clearly on his path.
Yeah, to me, he's clearly on his path.
Like,
and that's it's so freeing to even loose of agreeing with his specific policies and all that. Like, so this is like separate from that conversation. This is just purely relating to him as another human being in the world that is deeply on his spiritual path and his contribution to the world. And there's that ayahuasca video that you did. If you haven't watched it yet, please watch it. It's so good. That reaction video. Where there's this whole like AI generated story of Trump taking ayahuasca and facing his demons, and according to the video, going from this delusional path he's on to his actual spiritual path of being like a shaman in the forest. But actually no, like it's in some sense the opposite. Like us in the forest are the ones
are looking at Trump.
And Trump is like this mirror image of like a deeply flawed, imperfect human that's not devoting his whole life to healing himself, but is just on his path.
His fucking
and
path,
then it's like going to this place of like, what? Maybe that's possible.
Maybe
and
I
for
don't
me,
need to
exactly,
be fully healed to contribute.
And for some people, healing is a huge part of that journey. So I'm not saying like we should all just stop healing, but there's this deep spiritual freedom almost that comes out of seeing Trump and relating to him as a man on his spiritual path, a person on his spiritual path, and then kind of mirror imaging it back into yourself and finding the parts inside of you that feel shame of not being good enough yet to fully step into whatever your spiritual path is. And so I think that's, for me, the phrase like Trump is the ayahuasca trip like feels very alive for me, where he's this mirror image that activates shame within us that's holding us back from our own spiritual path, whatever that may look like, and is something about how unabashedly he is so imperfect according to the norms of society, and he's so unabashedly okay with that, and is so like, despite that, he's like so firmly just on his and and sometimes he says things and you're like, oh, like if I said that, I'd be like, I would just melt. Or if someone said that towards me, I would just melt. Which is because there's like this listening to that shame feeling. And not to say that we should all start acting like Trump, that's not the point, but stepping into the parts of us that are like scared of connecting to a path that does not track others' expectations of what our path is. I think that's the key thing.
I feel like that's a great point to close on, which is basically this provocation that, if you're someone who really feels triggered by Trump in different ways, I'm so curious that if you were to look within and see where is shame preventing you from offering yourself to society, contributing to society in a way that makes you feel alive? Like if you notice that in those moments where you feel so activated by Trump, if you could notice where is that triggering in you, and perhaps you won't find anything, perhaps you're just making shit up. Could be.
I think a lot of people will have it. Maybe not everyone, but I think for a lot of people this is true. Yeah.
But I resonate with that too. And I've been really landed in this frame, especially like men who do men's work, right? It's like there is this underlying sense that every man is your brother. And the frame that has landed in me is like Trump feels like a brother who's just like set out to set things right. And whether you agree with this frame or not, like, can you see him? Like, if you are a man who does spiritual men's work, which is rooted in this belief that every man is a brother and, we help each other as brothers, can you see that about Trump? And can you feel that towards him? And then from that place, can you listen to what he's saying and then decide whether you want to support his work in politics, or if you actually feel like, oh, as a brother, this is not where you should be. You should be doing something else. But can you say that from a place of brotherhood instead of looking at him as this like personification of all that is evil and messed up in the world?
Yeah, I think this is really edgy to say, but I think the same is true for women, of relating to men being on that mission and trying to do what's right for their tribe, in contrast to whatever is being told to them. I think there's a healing journey for women there too that's different from the men. One for men.
Say more. Say the edgy thing.
Well, I'm saying it, and I guess, but maybe to make it even more explicit.
Yeah.
Is the...
Like, what is the provocation you would want to give to the women who might be watching this?
I guess because masculine energy has done a lot of harm, I think it gets like blanketed onto all men, and especially a man like Trump feels so much like the type of man that has done a lot of harm. And so I think it's a massive healing journey, and probably a very hard one. To see, like you're saying, see Trump as a man who is connected to his heart, and is doing what he thinks is right for his tribe, because he sees his tribe being, in his opinion, being taken advantage of by elites that don't care about the tribe, and being like a lot of suffering being caused, and that he's the person that can, with his like raw masculine energy, just come in and just like, just like clear the field of all this like parasitic energy. And then again, not necessarily them being like, okay, I'm going to vote for Trump. That's a whole. It's like there's really two very separate paths that we're talking about at the same time.
Okay, I'm recording this a few days after the conversation with Luca, and we are actually in the midst of a major disaster recovery operation here in Asheville, North Carolina. And the last parts of that conversation kept having technical interruptions, so I just wanted to record this as a closing piece. Like, we lost some of the footage we had recorded. But in summary, what we were trying to present to those of you who are viewing is to look at Trump as the opportunistic choice to take us further into the direction of greater liberty, greater freedom, greater choice for all humans. Instead of trying to evaluate him against some perfect utopian model that you might have in your mind. And also hold I think I'll leave it at that. You got the rest through the conversation, and we unpacked what opportunistic choice making looks like, what is the difference between being rooted in your values and having a long-term vision, and how that opens you up to different possibilities that you may not have ever imagined yourself aligned with before. And this is definitely one of the situations that you may, like me 4 years ago, may never have imagined yourself aligning with Trump. But Trump, in our mind, is the opportunistic choice for safeguarding progressivism in the United States. That's all. And hopefully, I will see you on the other side of this massive hurricane that's moved through Asheville.